I am coming on here and I've been thinking a lot about my religious deconstruction journey. I became a Christian when I was a teenager, and I want to talk about my journey through deconstruction. I grew up in the Catholic Church and I went to Catholic school, so I was very familiar with that component of God and being a good person and doing confession and doing penance. And then when I became a Christian, like a born again Christian at 16, I believed with all my heart that this was the one true way, that Jesus was the way, the truth, the life, and I needed to invite him into my heart to be saved, and that I would go to hell if I didn't choose this. And so there was two components. I felt that I was in love with God, and I also felt that it was the only way to get to heaven. About 3.5 years ago, when my life hit some serious bottoms and I questioned everything. I didn't mean to dismantle my faith. It wasn't my intention to question God. I thought this was the way, that Christianity was the answer to everything. I was faithful to what I believed. I lived it. I prayed it. When so many things started unraveling in my life, I just started to question, what about this? What about all of the things that I believed? Because when your life unravels, when the anchors you stood on come apart, it forces you to question what you were living, what you were believing, what scripts you were following, what rules. And it's like the file folders of your mind just get dumped and you question everything. It felt chaotic. It felt traumatic. It felt like my life was being ripped from me. It felt like I didn't have anything to believe anymore because my faith was what held me. But as I dismantled everything to change course based on what my life had become at that point, it's like this old file folder of my faith and what I believed in God and as the one true way, it didn't fit. It didn't make sense anymore. How this kind of God outside of me, I needed to get his approval. And when I was sitting on the floor of my life, I felt absolutely powerless. And there had been moments in my life where, in those places, I pleaded to God. I pleaded for someone to save me. And something shifted in me during this time where instead of pleading externally for some source outside of me to come and get me out, it's like my power shifted. And I asked myself, why can't you save yourself? And that, when I was a Christian, would have sounded blasphemous. Absolutely. I don't have any power to save myself. I'm so weak and powerless because that's what I believed as a Christian, that I am powerless. How dare I try to play God in my own life and take control as if I have the power to create the life that I desire. I was conditioned to bow and plead and just be grateful no matter what. And when I was in that place where I felt like I had nothing left, I had to pull something from within me. And I realized that I had to create the life that I desired. I had to be the one to save myself. And that's when it really unraveled for me because I came to a point where I questioned, why can't it be different? I started to take my inner authority back. It's like I had just given over my authority to my life. And that pain was the greatest gift to help me fight for myself again and to realize that I needed to take radical authority over my life. A switch went off in my brain, and I realized how powerless I had been living. But it's in those darkest nights of our soul that we see that it's a decision to liberate ourselves. I could have stayed and sat and pleaded and prayed and just waited. And that was a victim mentality that I needed to take radical ownership over my life. I needed to step up and create the inner world that I wanted. And so that's when I started to take my power back. I thought, wait, what I really desire is emotional health. I don't need to pray and beg and wait and hope. I need to create new beliefs. I need to step into my own power and pull back my energy from places that I have given it away as though it controlled me. I went through this process of releasing victimhood, then taking back the keys and going to the doors that I wanted and beginning to open them. As I released the old conditioning and the places that I had been giving away my power, I started to feel like I could direct my own life again. I was tight with Jesus. I was an aspiring trad wife, essentially. I had given up my career because I thought that my highest calling was to serve my husband and children and the whole deal. And it never felt healthy to me. I worked so hard to be obedient to God, to what I thought was the truth of Scripture, telling me my role as a woman, telling me my role on this earth. And it felt small, but it felt like it was what I was supposed to find joy in and fulfillment. For years, I tried to find my joy in being small and playing a role and staying in the boxes that were defined by the church. And it wasn't until everything unraveled that I realized I was following a script, that I was told this is the right way. This is the only way you can have spirituality and be right. And I realized how narrow minded I was. I looked out at the world and I thought anyone else who didn't believe that was living a life of sin and deception. If that was you, I would have said, you're totally deceived. I'm sure that people look at me that way, that I am deceived, that I am lost, that I am angry at God, and they may even pray for me to come back. And I used to believe that too. I really did. But I don't believe that anymore. As I've really walked this road of surrendering everything I thought was right, I have found more peace than I can even describe. I remember when I just opened my hands and let go of all the certainty, because that's what it is. We crave certainty. And so many of us that grew up with trauma are attracted to the church because it feels certain. It feels like this is the answer. This is it. What I mean by that is when you grow up with dysfunction, you are always questioning the way, what is normal, what is right. And when I found the church, it felt like I don't have to question anymore. But it wasn't true. I still questioned everything I was doing, mothering, wifing, just living as a woman in the world and always trying to be good, do right. And when I started to let all that go, I started to look at people around me with different eyes, with human eyes. I lived with an entitled mentality, enshrined in what I thought was love. Oh, I just love their souls. I want them to go to heaven. That's just what Christians make themselves think. And I think there is a lot of it that is genuine. If you truly believe that the whole world is going to hell, it's so much fear. I started questioning, is there a place burning that some God who's so loving created? And if I don't love him, he's going to send me to burn? Could that be love? And then and Christians talk about justice. Well, that there is not enough justice. You could sell me for me to burn my child if they don't love me, or if they don't give me the kind of love that I've told them they have to give. So am I more loving than God? Or am I just not just? And those are the kinds of questions that I really wrestled with. And as I started to let it go one by one piece of what I thought was truth, that I pulled back parts of myself, my humanity, seeing people through the eyes of peace and love, because I didn't believe that any of us were these horribly flawed and sinful human beings anymore. I think that we all have choice, but I saw people with fresh eyes. I stopped having an agenda with everybody around me. And I felt free to just care about people, to just love people. I didn't feel bad for everybody. And I didn't look down on everybody because I just saw us as true equals. That was one of the most beautiful parts of deconstructing my faith. I started to see people just as people. I started to see myself as just like everybody else. And I'm not trying to villainize all Christians. I think that there's many beautiful people in the church. I'm close friends with some of them. And that's because I can maintain friendships because the people that I still relate to see humanity in others. I think what happens in the church that I did, I othered people. There was a my way and there was a wrong way. And it was unfortunate if you weren't in the right way. Since then, a lot of just spiritual stuff that I have unraveled and unthreaded and untangled from my mind and my heart and my soul. And there was a period of time where I couldn't even say the word God. I couldn't talk about anything religious or spiritual. It was so triggering to me because I had gone through some spiritual trauma and gaslighting kinds of stuff as a woman in the church. And that was really still impacting my nervous system for a long time. But as I've gotten space and healing and safety, I'm not deceived. I'm not running away from anything except what was always unhealthy. And that was living from a place of fear. I remember going to a kids event one time and I was already starting to deconstruct, but I just had a lot of doubts and questions, which I know Christians will say, that's totally fine. You should doubt, you should question and wrestle with it. But there were just too many holes for me to hold strong to this anymore. Youth pastor was speaking to a whole group of children, and they were talking about how this great big God just loves the world so much, like a big daddy. So there's a whole range of ages that were taking this in their own developmental way. They were saying that this big daddy that loves you so much, but you disobey him, and that saddens him. And because of that, you're separated from him. Without this Jesus, he has to punish you, have to be punished. That means hell if you don't accept Jesus. I had been recovering from a lot of trauma at that point, a lot of narcissism, gaslighting, just really unpacking the kind of dysfunction that I had lived through from childhood all the way on up. I listened to the message, and all I could hear was somebody describing an abusive dad, an abusive father, the narcissistic kind where I don't want to beat you, but I have to for your own good. And I'm thinking, oh my God, that is literally what it sounds like. It's fear tactics, fear, putting fear into these children and then asking them to say a prayer. And that was the point that I really wondered, what am I doing with my children here? What am I putting into them? I don't want to live my faith in light of fear, which is ironic because I do believe the words that Jesus spoke in the life he lived was such a model of true humanity. And it was beautiful. But to live in fear, To me, that whole salvation message was love wrapped up. It was fear all enshrined in love. It looked like love, but it was fear tactics. It was like sales psychology in scripture form. And it just became so obvious to me then and there that I didn't want to be a part of this, that it felt conditioning. It felt like psychological manipulation for children. And there were all these studies that the church would talk about. I remember one specific study they talked about kids getting saved, and they were less likely to get saved once they reached age 18. And so the big push of the church was to try to get kids saved early. And when I really started doing a lot of emotional inner healing work, serious internal family systems, and understanding developmentally what happens to our brains when we're little and how trauma affects us, I realized that this was a form of psychological manipulation, because children, especially children before the age of 7, are complete sponges in their brain. They don't really have a conscious network that's filtering and reasoning. And so anything that's coming into them, they're absorbing as truth. They're not questioning it. They don't have anything to question against it, because their reasoning part of their brain hasn't really developed yet. And so when I started putting all these pieces together, I thought, oh, that's why the church needs to get children. They're the followers they need before age 18, because kids start to question. And when there's holes, we start to question. So what the church does is starts to tell children they're rebellious or they're turning away, when what's happening is they are psychologically starting to connect the dots of what makes sense and what really doesn't. And then they slap a sticker of, no, that's faith. It's just trusting. It's just faith. But when it's a faith that's built on fear, you follow out of fear. But they won't say that, because it's about love. It's about God loves you so much. It's about your love for Jesus. No one will say that it's about fear, but that is what it's about. And I have come such a long way in the last 3 years. I never would have thought that I would be standing here right now speaking this. And I know what this means for me. I know what it makes me look like in the church. And yet I say it anyway, because I have never found more freedom than when I stepped out of that system. And never in a million years would I have been the woman to say that. I would have lived and died on it, on what I believed. I did missions trips. I did it all. I tried to love people into the kingdom. I lived it with my whole life, but it didn't line up. And as I've walked this road of deconstruction, I've really discovered radical ownership over my life. And it wasn't until I left the church that I found true emotional healing, because all the years that I was in the church, I was seeking it. I was pleading for it. I was praying for emotional healing from my trauma, from my past, and wanting to understand what I thought was wrong with me from my trauma, from my childhood. And I was just led to pray the lies away, never given real tools to understand emotional development and healing and maturity. It was spiritually bypassed away. All under this: have faith, just trust, just pray, just give it over to God. All these esoteric concepts that didn't actually help me find healing. And I see why people from trauma are drawn to this system. I see it over and over. People come in, and the church loves testimonies from people who were, quote, very broken, people who come in off of drugs on the street. And am I saying everything is bad or wrong? No, because I think there are communities that are very loving and very welcoming, but it's always with an agenda. And there is such a cult like mentality with the church that anyone who comes in comes under the agenda. And I experienced love in many ways in the church. I won't deny that. I experienced love from people that I still love. And so I'm not taking down individual people. I'm talking about an entire system that's filled with manipulation wrapped up in this is just the word of God and this is authority. And it comes harder even on women and women's roles and who women are supposed to be in the church because there's not freedom for women. And I remember hearing a sermon one time that Jesus was for women more than anyone else. And I see that. I see how the stories of Jesus, he was for women. But I don't see the church that treats women like Jesus talked about the stories about him. Women are still considered second class in the church. No one would say that. Very few. Maybe fundamentalists would say that women are second, but they very much have little authority in the church. And for me, all of this coming back to my own sense of my power, my equity as a woman, and my right to have a voice, all of this is part of my journey of realizing that I had lived so long in a system that I thought all men were my authority. I wasn't allowed a real voice, not one of influence in any way, shape, or form that has an impact or brings direction in any way because I'm a woman. And by that very nature, God made me not to be allowed to have authority. And I believed that for a long time. And everybody around me that I knew believed that as well. And that's what I tried to live up to. And so that is so much what I talk about now is finding your voice and realizing that as a woman, you're not secondary. You don't have less authority. Your voice doesn't have less impact or influence or authority because you're a woman. And a lot of my mission is coming out of this place of realizing that we don't have to give that power away as women. I lived it. And it's funny because my mother told me my whole life not to give my authority to a man. And when I went into the evangelical Christian church, I thought she was just deceived and she didn't know better. And so I bought into the ideology that she was wrong and I just needed to give my voice away. And she told me, don't give that away. And that's what I'm coming back to now. And that's what I speak to. And I'm also finding in this beautiful space after deconstructing, releasing this idea of the Old Testament narcissistic God, which I know a lot of Christians, women, have a hard time coming to terms with, anyways. I have found I'm beginning to go down the road of rediscovering the creator that was always within me, that was always a part of me, not a male gendered God who I have to plead to for my salvation out there, but a spiritual essence and creator, a source of life, of the universe that was always within me, my inner voice. I no longer am a part of any type of church. And I will say there are components that I do miss, although I will say that I do enjoy that I don't live in an echo chamber anymore. And I'm just embraced just being with people who are different from me. And just, I really enjoy learning from other people. I just really enjoy other people's perspectives on life. What I believe today is that we are spiritual beings having a human experience. And there have been so many instances in my life where I know that there is a source, a creator coming through me and it's like flowing. And I think of it like a river of life that we come here on this earth and we've got this river of life flowing through us. But things happen to us and we get locked down and with beliefs and things that cover up or block, dam our ability to let that river flow through us. And I believe that's the creator. I have always been a very prophetic person. I'm very sensitive to energy, very sensitive to people's energies. And I do hear things very clearly. I've always been really sensitive. And for a long time, I thought that was a detriment to me that I was so sensitive because I used to be hurt very easily. And I'm the classic overfunctioner many times. I'm not anymore, but I used to be because I've let that go. And I'm still working on it sometimes, but I've let it go and I have a new identity. I don't have to overfunction to feel worthy anymore. But now I love just being with people and listening to their hearts. And this is where I'll end. I had the most beautiful experience of getting to be a witness for my friend as she did her 5th step in the 12-step program just recently. And it was one of the most beautiful experiences of my life because it was like our two souls were meeting. And she just poured out the pains and the wounds as I witnessed her say things that were hidden out loud. It's probably one of the most beautiful experiences of intimacy with somebody's soul that I've ever had, because we rarely bare our souls to that degree with each other. And it was so amazing because there was no agenda. There wasn't anything that I needed to do. There was nothing she needed me to do. It was just to speak it out loud, to just witness that. And that in itself, I've realized, that is spiritual. That is our spirits interacting together. And I didn't need to give her something extra. She just needed to have that spiritual experience with me as another human. And when we can go into that place, it requires us to get into our own vulnerable heart, to go to our heart, which means we need to release the agendas we have about what way we think it needs to go. And as we release that, the river flows through us to another person. And when they release their own agendas and they show up with their souls, their river flows through to me. And that to me is the pinnacle of us being spiritual beings in human bodies. And that's what I'm coming back to. That is the beauty that I'm finding in my human body. Not rigidity and roles and religion, but the divine that wants to create and flow through me. And I don't feel the need to be certain anymore. What I feel is what's coming through me, and trusting that. And then when I witness another person just being poured on by the love that flows through, that to me is the most beautiful spiritual experience. And I know that I'm in a place of peace and it feels right. And so to wrap this up, I feel like I'm really rediscovering what spirituality means, who we are, why we're here, what our life purpose is. And that small experience just helped to validate that we're here to, like Ram Dass says, we're just here walking each other home. I love you guys. It's just a bit of my story. Thanks.